All right, I know it's after lunch, so hopefully everyone's refreshed and not ready for a nap. But my name's Linda Kohler. I'm the PBIS district coach for Worcester County. I've been doing that since 2005, and I've been associated with PBIS at school-wide since 2001. So there's some things I've learned along the way, and I would like to share them with you. Some of them will be refreshers, and some of them will be new things. But it's always nice. I always like to be refreshed and say, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So hopefully this will help you along the way. So we're not going to take a break. So please take care of your needs as you need to. So our plan for today, we're going to connect the TFI to classroom systems. How many of you know what the TFI is? Okay, great, most of you. So we used to use a tool called the BOQ, the Benchmarks of Quality, to assess our implementation of PBIS. Now we're using the TFI, which is the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. And so there's some critical elements in there. All the critical elements are the same. It's just that it's a lot more detailed, and it's asking you to provide a lot of visual documentation of the things that you're doing rather than verbal. How many of you have participated in sets? Okay, so there's a walkthrough tool within the TFI that addresses classroom systems. So it's a lot shorter. There's only 5 questions, 3 for staff and 2 for adults, or 2 for students. And so they're the same questions that were in the set. But that will also address these classroom systems that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk a little bit about expectations and how we can connect that PBIS language throughout the day. We're going to talk about how to give specific behavioral praise, feedback, and how to do corrections positively. And we're also going to talk a little bit about connecting the PBIS language with the home. So we've got a lot to get done. All of these are on your TFI, so you will be scored on them. So hopefully by the end of this, I'm having so much trouble with this thing today. It's like skipping ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't know, but don't aim it at that. Aim it at the... There.
Okay. Let's see.
I'll get you some help.
So by the end of this session, I'm hoping that you'll have a greater understanding of how to connect classroom systems to your school-wide expectations. So this works. There we go. So the TFI has all of these elements for Tier 1, and we're going to be talking about 1.3, 1.4, 1.8, 1.9, and then a little bit with 1.11, which is family. But most of it's going to be emphasizing classroom. This is what the walkthrough tool looks like. So you see there are 3 staff questions and 2 student questions. So a lot shorter than the walkthrough on the set. But it will help answer some of your questions. This is what the page looks on the TFI and how we score. So there's a 0, 1, and a 2, and depending upon what criteria you meet, that's the score you get. So we're going to start with 1.3. So how many of you have 3 to 5 expectations in your school? Okay, great. And are they posted? Yes. Have them hanging up? Yes. Okay, so the reason for this was so that we would have a common language throughout the whole building, and hopefully that would go to the home. So I walked into schools and have seen posters hanging up in the hallways. And then sometimes when I walk in classrooms, I have to walk around and really look for them. So you don't have to raise your hand, but I want you to think about either your classroom or your school and determine whether these posters are visible. Are they actually hanging in a spot where you can see them, you can point to them, you can talk about them, and students can see them? So just think about that as we're talking through this. Here's some examples of some posters. So do the students in your classroom know what the expectations mean in your classroom? We hang them up on the walls. We do our school-wide lessons at the beginning of the year and in January. But do the students in your specific classroom know what those expectations mean in your room? So there's a high school teacher in Worcester County that every year she hands out a chart that has the school's expectations on it and what it looks like in her classroom. And she's found that it's been very valuable because she also sends it home to the parents. So everything's clear and everything's connected to the PBIS language, because that's what we want. We want to use this language. We don't want just posters hanging on the wall. We want to use it throughout the day so it becomes a culture. Also, I taught special ed for many years, and way back then, I had a self-contained classroom. So the first week of school, my students came into my room, and I had our expectations hanging up on the wall. And I also had one of those chart papers over there, and I had each expectation on a chart paper. And the students had to come up and write down what they thought that expectation looked like in my classroom. And it was really nice because I kept it up there all year. And I even had, the peers were reminding and refreshing them about the expectation that they wrote the first week of school. And so they were using the language. And it became something that I used often because I would just point to it and just do a refresher. And then the student who wrote something on there would share and say why it's important in the classroom. So they took ownership of it. Have you taught the expectations in your classroom? Other than the school-wide rules, ones that were scheduled in September and January? Are you teaching lessons throughout the year? So here's an example from an actual TFI walkthrough from last year. So this teacher at the beginning of her class decided to refresh the school-wide expectations at the beginning of every class period. So what this teacher said was, remember, respect others by working quietly, and be responsible by completing and handing in your work. Simple. Start the class off, give them the expectation, connect it to school-wide PBIS language, and then move on to your academics. Here's another example of an actual TFI walkthrough in an elementary school. This teacher was using the language throughout her lesson. So it was a vocabulary lesson on the word gossip. So she actually went over to the poster, she pointed to respecting others, and that was the basis for that whole discussion of that lesson. This is how we connect school-wide PBIS to the classroom. Because teachers have different personalities, teachers teach differently, and that's fine. But we're trying to build a culture where this vocabulary is used constantly throughout the day. And that's the message that I want to bring to you today, and I want you to take that to your school, because it's not difficult to do. It's just kind of getting into that routine of doing it. So 1.4 is teaching expectations. So the expectations are taught to all students in all classrooms and across settings. So all of you have that matrix in all of the locations, correct?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you have a matrix. Great. Do you have a plan to teach that at the beginning of the school year?
Yes.
Okay, this is something I've had hanging by my desk for years. I just really like it. It's a constant reminder that we're not only teaching academics, but we're teaching behavioral expectations. I'll give you a minute to read it, and then I just want some thoughts about it. Anyone have any comments? We teach academics in a systematic manner.
I mean, I think we just automatically assume kids know how to behave, so when they don't behave, instead of talking to them and trying to teach them and show them an example, our tendency is to just, correct them or punish them because we think, oh, they should already know how to do this. When the reality is not all kids know how to do that.
Right.
And I think we assume at home this is what they're getting taught, and that isn't always happening. So.
And the rules may be different at school and home. And we're going to get to that later in the presentation because we're preparing them for a career. And so our expectations are in line with jobs, whereas home expectations and friends' expectations are a little bit different. But that's a great point. We just assume that they should know this, and we don't think that they should be taught, especially at the high school and middle school level. I think elementary is a little bit more willing to accept the fact that we need to teach this, but we really do need to teach it because if we don't get them in line behaviorally, we're not going to get anywhere academically. So I think that's why we're all here, and that's why we're all involved in PBIS, to find a positive way to address these behaviors. So here's a teaching example of just a school-wide. And do you all teach the PBIS process to the students and staff at the beginning of the year?
Yes.
Okay. How about in the middle of the year?
Review.
January, review it. Is there anyone in here that teaches weekly lessons or monthly lessons?
I mean, I do monthly lessons, but it's on a variety of different topics.
Mm-hmm. And does it connect the PBIS language with what you're talking about? So that's where we want to go with this. I think we're all doing really well with our expectations. Our expectations are posted. We're doing things with them. But the biggest thing that we've noticed when we went out on those set visits was there is no connection between the classroom and the school-wide PBIS. The teachers kind of doing their own thing with their own language. And we really need to stress the fact that we're building a culture. And that when that student leaves that classroom and goes to specials or anywhere else in the building, we should all have the same language. So we can't make kids behave, but we increase the likelihood that they will. And that's what PBIS is all about. So we really have to connect it with the classroom, because the classroom teacher is the one that spends most of the time with them. Did you know that discipline was derived from Latin and means teaching? Anyone know that? No. So our focus really needs to be on teaching those replacement behaviors, which is what we're doing in our PBIS lessons. We're teaching the expectations rather than focusing on the negative behaviors. So this is what it looks like in your TFI. And we're going to be moving to 1-8. Did you lose a cell phone? Yay. All right, so every good teacher has routines. So in 1-8, it talks about classroom routines. Every classroom has routines. Every classroom that's functioning well has routines. Entering class, locating materials, asking for help, where to turn in your assignments, how to exit from class. We all go through those. Oftentimes, those are taught in our PBIS lessons. Walking down the hall, entering the cafeteria, entering the classroom, but then teachers kind of add on to that as their routines. So that's in 1-8. Here's a list of the classroom procedures that you could do in your classroom that I showed you earlier. There's a lot of research on how changing behavior and how many times it takes to change an unlearned or a learned behavior. And but 70% of behavioral concerns are due to the task presentation. So we know that sometimes we modify, but we also have to remember that sometimes we have to present tasks in many different ways. Visually, auditorily, using manipulatives, using creativity, because 70% of your behavioral concerns can be fixed by the way you present your task. So if you have some behaviors during some lessons, you can take a look at your lesson and reframe it. The other 30% are related to social skills or mental or physical factors. So we know we're putting a lot of emphasis on mental health. Seems to be growing. The needs seem to be growing. We're training people in youth mental health first aid and other strategies with social skills. Teachers do social skills all the time and don't probably even know that they're doing them. So just an example of an elementary school. So first week of school, teacher says, when I ask a question and you want to answer it, raise your hand and wait to be called on. That's a social skill. So any behavior that you want to change or you want to make it a rule in your classroom, that would be a social skill. And we're going to practice a little bit of that in a bit. Lots of research on changing behavior. I just chose the one that said 36 repetitions to change a behavior. That's a lot. So we have to prepare ourselves to accept the fact that it's not going to happen overnight. It's very difficult to generalize. Some kids can spit the expectations right back to you. They know exactly what they do, but in the moment, it's not generalized, so they don't do it. So we just have to keep teaching and reteaching. Praise is an effective form of discipline, one of the most effective forms of discipline. And we praise a lot in elementary school, but middle and high, we don't use quite as much praise. Although I have to say that going in classrooms and observing, I seem to see praise in in elementary and high school, and least amount in middle, which is interesting. About 5 or 6 years ago, I partnered with a gentleman from Johns Hopkins University, and we went into a school for 2 years. And the first day we went into the school, we just walked around the classrooms and tallied praise in a middle school. And we got 0. There was no praise. There was not even good. So we went through a whole series of professional development on how important praise was. And at the end of the second year, the teachers were praising specifically, behaviorally, and their data looked really, really good. So praise really works. I'm completely convinced after doing that. Also, 4-to-1 rule. 4 positives to every negative. Have you heard of that? It's PBIS. So we had one teacher at one of our schools that put 25 rubber bands on her wrist, and every time she said something negative to a child, she moved it to the other hand to remind herself that she had to do the 4 positives. We've had people that have used those golf counters and pitch counters where they made a goal for themselves as a staff to increase the positive, and so they just clicked every time they said something positive and hopefully met their goal. That's just one way to have self-awareness. Okay, so then there's the brain and the chemicals that are released in the brain when kids hear praise or when they get a reward. The dopamine triggers happiness, and we want our kids to be happy, so the more we praise for positive behaviors and the more we ignore negative behaviors, the happier our kids are going to be. Well, I did have a picture of the brain to show you, but use your imagination. Also, Jensen has done a lot of research on learning and the brain, and talking about feedback. Timely feedback is really, really important in order for learning to take place. So we're going to talk a little bit about feedback. We're going to do an activity with it. We're going to talk about praise, and we're going to do an activity with it, and we're going to talk about corrections. But feedback in the form of praise has been researched, and it is very effective. Anyone have a favorite praise word? Come on, I know you use praise words all day long. Louder?
Fabulous job.
Fabulous. Any more?
Awesome.
Awesome.
Proud.
Proud.
Really persevered.
Okay, great. And that might be an expectation word too, persevered. Okay, so it's really important to come. I have a whole list of praise words that are really fun to use, but remember that we can't assume that we know that they know why we're praising them. So we say good job, we can't say that they know why we're saying good job. We might have a totally different perception than they do. So specific behavioral praise is really, really important to attach to that favorite praise word. Avoid praising for the product. Oftentimes, everyone who got 100% gets a real big general praise word, or even specific. Great job, you got 100%. Okay, so think about this. Okay, I got 100%. Do I know why I got 100%? There are so many behaviors that lead to 100%. What behavior has this student been working on so that he actually achieved the 100%? It could be on-task behavior, it could be studying, it could be getting homework done, it could be a number of reasons. And so specifically praising that student for the behavior that led to the 100% is going to be much more meaningful in the long run, because it's going to be able to be generalized from your class to every other class. And then, of course, connected to the PBIS language. Okay, so I want everyone to stand up, stretch a little bit. So I had this young lady who I'd worked with from 3rd grade, she's now in 10th grade. on the autism spectrum and blind. And we started doing social skills and praise words with her. And within a couple of years, she was praising everybody in the school, specifically for behaviors. And it was just really awesome to see that what we were doing constantly with her to change her behaviors, she was sharing it with others. She was giving feedback to others. You guys probably know who that is. And still doing it, as a matter of fact. So a really good way to start is teaching your kids to look for all the good things that happen in people. We want them to not look at the negative things, but to look at the good things and seek them out. And I can remember, we've all had years like this where we've had a student who, you know, we just know we're driving to work and it's like, oh my goodness, what is he going to do today? We've all been there. We've all had classes like that. And I think at one point I just said to myself, I'm just stressing myself out so much, and my mental health is going way downhill because every day I'm thinking about what is he going to do. So I kind of convinced myself that I was going to look for the good things. Okay, I'm going to look for something that we've been working on that he does, and I'm going to really stress on it today. I'm going to praise him a lot for it today. And that year kind of turned around for me and my mental health, as well as the student. So just teaching peers to praise each other, and then eventually getting them to do specific behavioral praise is going to be a life skill for them, and it's going to make them happier. So let's just practice, and I'm sure the last group I had so many to share that they were using, but we don't want them to get all riled up and excited and everything. So we want to do some quiet praise. So we've got the microwave. Let's try that. Okay, so we teach the kids. Somebody does something really well. Then we got the clam wave. And we've got the you are worthy. You are worthy. We've got the silent cheer. We've got the ole ole. We've got the disco. And we've got the fireworks. So you can teach any of those or all of those to your class. It would make learning fun. It would have them appreciate their peers' efforts. And anyone have any that they use in their class or school?
Round of applause.
Okay, yeah, the round of applause, that's a good one. Anything else?
Kiss your brain.
Kiss your brain, that's a good one. I forgot about that one. Yes?
Our acronym is pause, so we would pause up.
Ah, pause up. Okay. So this would really just stress the positive. It would also get the teacher into the positive mood, looking for the good things, ignoring the unwanted behaviors. And then eventually you can teach the kids how to specifically praise. But it's just one that really doesn't, and this doesn't interrupt instruction. It's just like a little bit of praise. So, okay, well you can sit down or you can keep standing. So we're going to practice. I handed out a handout. The first page of the handout is a chart on social skills training. It talks about teaching. It talks about refreshing, feedback, and praise. And we're going to start with the last column, which is praise. I'm going to give you an example after this, so don't stress that I'm giving you directions that you don't have an example for. So we're going to begin with a general praise word. You've heard a lot of them before. We're going to include the student's name. Then we're going to praise for the highest level of achievement. And that's important because somebody mentioned earlier when we were doing these charts that when kids that are always doing the right thing rarely ever get praised or get gotchas and the other kids don't. So you have to know where your kids are and what they can do and praise for the highest level of praise, of achievement. Praise behaviorally, and use the PBIS word, whatever that might be in your school. So here's an example. Well, there was an example. Awesome, Johnny, you showed responsibility by completing the assignment and turning it in on time. Fabulous. Okay, so in that last column, I want you to think of some behavior that you may teach in your classroom or your school. And I want you to begin with a general praise word, put a student's name in there, and I'm sure you've got that student in mind, what they did, and relate it to a PBIS word. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to ask for a couple of people to share out. Everyone understand? Yeah. About 1 more minute. Okay, everyone finished? Have a volunteer to share?
Fantastic, Sedona. You practiced the least part of our pray motto when you remained quiet during the video presentation. Way to go.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Anyone else?
Awesome, Jordan. You did a great job showing caring by holding the door for Kathy while she was carrying all those books.
Oh, great. Thank you. And you know, and you can adjust your language depending upon what level you teach, elementary, middle, high. I'll just throw this out. I was doing a visit at a high school, and there were 8 boys in the hall, and one of them had a paper, and he was kind of showing it to his friends, and I just went over to the group. I would say they were probably 9th or 10th graders. And I said, do you have a positive office referral there? And he said, I do. And I said, well, what do you think about him? And he said, well, I just think it's great. I put it in my portfolio. And the other young man says, I love it. He said, my mom makes me so happy. She's just thrilled with me when I get these positive office referrals. And each one of those young men had something to say positive about that in their group of peers to me who they didn't know. And I just thought that was remarkable, because oftentimes we think high school, they don't care. But they found so many ways to use these positive office referrals, which is also a form of praise. And when it's handed to them, they are praised, and they're praised specifically for it. So just something to think about for high school. We're going to move to feedback and acknowledgments. So how many of you use a cash system? How many of you use positive office referrals? And how many of you use Dojo? Okay. Okay. All right, anyone have any suggestions?
Did you wake up your computer? Someone else's.
All right, so I'm just going to go with this, unless we can figure this out. So the important thing about acknowledgement is that the reason why we came up with it in the first place was so that we could have a positive verbal interaction with our students. So that was kind of one of the reasons. The other thing was that they would have something tangible to stick in their pocket or whatever, so that when they're walking down the hall and they see an adult, they can share it with them, they can share it with a peer, it's still in their pocket, they can take it home, they can share it with their parents, so they're constantly reinforcing themselves for what they did. So the cash system and the positive office referrals do that. Dojo gives the positive verbal interaction between the teacher and the student, and is sent home, so there's information sent home. The student just doesn't have it on them. But they're still both pretty much achieving the same thing as long as the verbal is going with it. So I have a quiz here, which I hope you have up there. I need to activate it. It's not on my laptop, it's turned. Unless you think it just yeah.
This is like
Right.
the sheet here.
Her sheet in. Okay, so we're going to do a test, a quiz. All right, and all I want you to do is, I'm sorry it's not up here for you to see, but I'll just read it to you. So I want to know if this is an acknowledgement, a tangible acknowledgement and positive verbal interaction when you place on the desk of every student that received 100% on an assignment while they're at lunch. Yes or no? No. Okay. When you seek opportunities to find behaviors that lead to 100% on an assignment and pair with specific behavioral praise, great job, Davey, at respecting learning by staying on task and checking your work. Awesome. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. When you pass out as students are leaving the classroom saying, good job.
No.
Seek opportunities for positive behaviors that align with PBIS expectations throughout your class period.
Yes.
Take away after it's earned.
No.
Okay, I like that. That was a definite no. How about the graduated color chart that moves from green, yellow to red and is verbally and publicly displayed? Okay, great. I'm glad that I heard a lot of no's on that one. All right, you guys did great on that. All right, so here's some more examples. The examples we got here were great. Here's some more examples of specific behavioral praise that I noticed when I did my walkthrough with TFI last year at different schools. You are doing an awesome job of respecting others' learning by working quietly in groups. The word respecting was a PBIS word. This was a high school, and their PBIS word was ownership. Awesome, you took ownership of that assignment and persevered. High five, you did an amazing job of respecting your environment by cleaning up your area. Great. Fantastic job of being responsible by working cooperatively and diligently in groups. So those are really good examples. Okay, how about staff? Any of you do staff incentives? Okay. What do you do?
We do, we have Mustang tickets as our resources for the classes for students. And we print out of all the Mustang tickets per month at the faculty meeting. We pick out a ticket and each faculty member each month is $20 reward. And we also do monthly kudos, which means you can nominate a friend. It's kind of like a email shout out to a staff member, but it's to the whole faculty once a month also.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
We do, we have aptitude slips that students can write for teachers. So we leave them in the area and then they can put them in like our lobster pot. So every week we pull out one and then we do student of the day every day, but then on Fridays we go to the staff member of the week. Our teacher made like this boogie board that has staff member of the week, and they get like a little goodie bag and we take their picture. So we've been doing that I think for maybe like 2 years now.
Great, and staff seems to like it?
Oh yeah, they love it.
Good. Good. Anyone else?
We do like a weekly gossip couple where a staff member is a certain spot, goes to the building for the whole week. So I think that actually
Great. Yeah. I'm sure that's appreciated in the wintertime, right? How about early outs? Anyone doing early outs? Where the administrator gives you a ticket to leave when the buses leave?
We started that this year. Like we have a PBIS calendar that's kind of linked with our one school, one book thing. So now, if you read that calendar every month, we have like a random casual day, a random early out, a random there was like a snack thing set up in the lounge. So like, you know, if you don't read the calendar, you might come to school and people are dressed casual and you're like, oh, why are you casual? Because you didn't read the calendar. So it kind of keeps them looking at the calendar and keeping them involved with like their morning meetings and stuff that they do. So.
Great ideas. Anyone else?
We vary. We needed to get teachers back out in the hallway, so we gave out tickets to teachers. They could sign their name on them, put them in a thing, and then we would just go to Walmart and buy like maybe a candy bar or something. Or we have a local business that does a happy hour, and the staff would go and they would donate food, and then all along with that, a couple bottles of adult beverage, and we could pull for them as well.
So you're saying getting out in the hall like for hall duty? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great idea.
We, as administrators, we would walk around with a ton of tickets in our pockets and say thank you very much for being in the hallway. We appreciate it for the students. Anytime we've caught the teachers doing, sometimes we target specific behaviors and sometimes it's just an overall thing that we do.
Yeah, thank you. So the other thing that's in 1.8 is following the continuum of consequences. So how many of you have a classroom versus office behavior chart matrix? All right, so most of you. So just kind of sending out reminders to teachers about what's classroom managed and what's office managed, because oftentimes we'll put that in the staff handbook or we'll hand it out at the beginning of the year and go over it and then forget about it. And then when you look at some of the office referrals, some of them are classroom managed behaviors. So just reminders, just little tidbits of reminders for that, because that is in 1.8. Vulnerable decision making, I could do a whole session on it, but basically it's allowing wait time and understanding your implicit bias. So we all know what our biases are, but we may not know what our implicit biases are. And we react very quickly to situations on our implicit bias and values. So just teaching teachers how to give themselves some wait time. So I'm going to give you a few examples after we talk about functions of behavior. So all kids, all adults, all people, human beings, communicate through behavior, and they're trying to gain something or get away from something. So think about your kiddos. How many of you have attention seekers? So those attention seekers are going to seek attention through negative behavior if we continue to respond to their negative behavior. It's really, really hard to do, but extinction is probably one of the best forms of changing behavior that I've come across besides the social skills. So you just ignore the unwanted behavior if it's not a safety concern, and you redirect to the positive behavior. So that kiddo who's getting the attention for the negative behavior, you just stop giving him attention for negative, and you start pouring on the attention for the positive behavior. And it does work, because they want attention. And if they're not going to get attention for those negative behaviors, they will de-escalate. Escape. How about the kiddo who knows what he has to do to get out of class? We all know that one. Gets out of class, goes to the office, gets out of all the work. Solution, try to keep him in class. If you can't keep him in class and you have to send him out of class, send the work with him. They should not be allowed to escape the work due to unwanted behavior. Everyone has a function of behavior. Some are sensory, some have sensory needs. They need to move. So that could be incorporated in your classroom, but some just keep asking for that drink of water at the bathroom because they have sensory needs. So know your kids. Tangible, basically, it's control. I want to do this and not that. So choices, control choices, really work for that. But when you're looking at, most of you on your office referral thing, especially if you're using Swiss, have motivation or function on your office thing. So really think about that. Think about, what is the behavior and what was he trying to gain? Or what was he trying to get away from? All right, so here's those neutralizing routines and vulnerable decision points. So delay your decision. See me after class instead of responding. That gives you time to calm down. It also gives the student time to calm down. Reframe the situation. How do we do that at school? Instead of stop doing that, let's talk about how we do that at school. Take care of yourself. We really have to watch ourselves and our mental health, because the more we get frustrated, the more quick we're going to respond negatively. So take care of yourself, take a few deep breaths, recognize your feelings, and you can model a whole class calming strategy. There's a teacher in one of our schools that has anger management strategies posted on her wall. She did that one year when she had like 5 kids in there who had anger challenges. And so she basically hung it on the wall and taught it to her students. And when a student gets upset or angry, or she feels upset or angry, she points to the chart and she has the whole class do it. And I was in there one day observing and saw it, and it seemed to be very effective, and it was obvious that it was a routine that had been taught, had been practiced and modeled. And, but that's just one little tidbit. I don't know how many of you ever heard of TRY. So here's the TRY method for teachers. Why? That's not good enough. Reflect on your emotions, use best interest, and let's try that again or a different way. And the first one was up there in the earlier session. It isn't up there now, so let me see if I can find that. Take a deep breath. So that's the one for teachers. This is the one for students. And obviously you're going to teach this to them, so it'll become natural. But take 3 deep breaths, reflect on your emotions, you got this. The other thing is if you want to put your social and emotional theme on there, mistakes are part of the learning process and you can teach that. We have a teacher at your school, a special educator, that uses effort, not perfection, all the time. You can use, that's a life skill, and you could use that all the way through high school. But it's just a reset routine for kids. What do you think of this? Do you agree or not agree?
It's good practice.
Excuse me?
Seems like a very long practice.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we assist them in escalating, they're going to keep escalating. So we have to teach them how to de-escalate. We have to know how to de-escalate.
I just think you're so right on with this piece, right on with it. And the thing about when you do have to stop, a child is being disrupted. What I'll hear when I walk in the classroom sometimes is such a long prologue. Do we have to go over this again? I have been correcting you about this for 3 weeks. You know the better behavior. It's up on the wall. Just didn't do that. No. Oh my gosh. Here goes 5 good minutes of instruction. When a simple sit down and pay attention would have been more than adequate. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you are, as teachers and staff in school, we are modeling social skills whether we want to or not. The entire time we're in that building, we are being examined. And if we model that kind of response to an angry behavior, what do we expect our students to do? It's a huge responsibility, but that modeling piece that we are constantly modeling is so powerful and a big responsibility for us.
It is, I agree. And that's really what classroom systems is all about. It's teaching, modeling, refreshing, praising, giving feedback, positive, corrective.
If the teacher lets herself lose her cool or his cool, that's such a negative impact on every student.
Right.
But if we can practice what we teach, maintain our decorum, take our own 3 deep breaths, give our own self-weight time, we're in a better place.
Definitely. So hopefully you'll be able to take this back to your staff. Next one is 1-9, feedback. So we need to allow for behavioral errors if it takes 36 times at least to change our behavior. And we need to reteach and reteach and reteach. So as far as feedback, the one thing that I learned about feedback is that if you correct a behavior and you don't acknowledge the fact that they've actually done something right, you're going to lose them. because they're going to be on the defense. So always find something they did right. That's right, you got your book out. You know, do anything that's small. That's right, you came to class today on time. And then find something they did right, followed by a reminder of what they should do. So an example, that's right, you arrived on time, but remember, get started on the assignment, just like we talked about. And so you would have taught this to your class if you add that last piece, and it's just a reminder, it's just feedback on a skill that you taught. That's right, you started, but remember, keep working or ask for help, just like we talked about. That's right, I'm pleased you came to class, but remember, try to be on time tomorrow so you don't miss anything. Instead of making a big issue about a student walking into class late and disturbing instruction and all that. So just, that's right, I'm pleased you came to class. You're welcome in my class, but remember, try to be here on time tomorrow. So on that paper that you wrote the praise on, there's a column that says feedback. So what I'd like you to do is try to write a feedback for the same behavior that you praised. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. And then I'm going to ask someone to share. Okay, would anyone like to share?
I'll try.
Okay, thank you.
Good job, Jordan, holding that door for Kathy, but remember, you do need to bring your book to class as we discussed.
Okay, and I may not have said this, but feedback, we shouldn't use a praise word for, because we're actually correcting a behavior. So we always use the word "that's right," and I think I failed to say that. So it would be, "That's right, you."
That's right, Jordan. Holding the door for Kathy showed caring, but remember, you do need to bring your book to class like we discussed.
It's great. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay.
That's right. You
drop right to work on your assignment, but remember to write your name at the top.
Great. So, so it kind of makes them feel like they're not doing everything wrong, and it acknowledges that they've done something right, but you're just giving them a reminder of an expectation that you have. Error correction. These are some examples of a TFI walkthrough that I did last year. And basically, we're looking for a positive way to correct errors, okay, rather than a negative way. Just like if they got something wrong in math, we wouldn't, you know, kind of say, you shouldn't have done that, and but we would find a little better way to do it. So here's some examples. I need eyes, please. So that's in response to a student who's off task. We're not pointing out that particular student. We're just giving a reminder to the class, and usually that redirects everybody. Student who gave the wrong answer. Almost, I heard it from someone, can you help? Points to somebody that had given the correct answer. So not really saying that it was wrong, but it was almost right. Somebody who's not focused. I know they're noisy in the hall, but stay focused. So just a little nicer way. A student who is more of a perfectionist is what I kind of observed, and wanted to make sure that he had it right. The teacher said there's no right or wrong answer in opinion questions. I want to know what you think. Remember, good writers connect main idea to detail. Let's connect. And this is what they said, but it did still, every time I read it, it doesn't. I wrote it down. Let's connect so we are you to do this on your own. Where do we start? I will show you a trick. So that was just a response to an academic where they couldn't connect the detail. Remember our strategies. Ask for help when you need it. Can I help you? That was a response to a student saying they couldn't do it. Remember, we sit on the carpet, please, for those that were up on their knees. You're noticing some good things, such as the base word. You're very close. That's fine, but what else can you add? So, I mean, we hear this from teachers all the time. I was just amazed at the positive corrections that teachers were doing, which is why I have so many examples from elementary through high school. But our teachers are doing it. They probably don't know they're doing it. So we might want to point out these are error corrections, because that is on the TFI. So a little bit about family. It's 111. Okay, so this is an elementary chart. And the school's PBIS expectations were respect yourself, respect others, respect learning, and respect your environment. And I do trainings with parents, and usually if it's at a specific school, I try to connect the PBIS language with the parent training. So this was something that a parent came up with as their home chart on what our expectations at school would look like in their home. And then this chart I gave you in your handout, not that one. And what parents can do with this is they could come up with the expectations with their child that match the expectations in the school, and then set a daily goal. And then they would assess whether they did well on towards working towards their goal that day. The one thing that I would like to say is that we remind parents that on the bottom, if they had a good day, then mark it. Put a smiley face, put a sticker, put what star or whatever on it. If they didn't have a good day, just leave it blank. Because what I've found is that when you send these charts home to parents, whether they're from school or not, and we have sad faces on them as well as smiley faces, the parents focus on the sad, and the child gets reprimanded for it. Where if you just have the smiley faces and you ask the parent to focus on one of the, focus on the smiles, praise them for the behaviors that they did that got the smiles, and then pick one that's blank and remind them to do better in that tomorrow. That's how we're going to make progress with changing the behavior. So that's elementary. Middle and high school, using the school-wide PBIS language when you're communicating with parents. Whatever your expectations are, that language should be embedded into your communication so that parents are learning what our language culture is in our school, and it kind of expands out to the family and the community. How many of you inform your parents when they get a positive office referral? Great. How do you do that? Just shout out.
By phone.
Phone call. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, stickers in the agenda.
Postcard.
Postcard home. Okay, great. Anyone use Facebook? We had one school in our county that used Facebook, and every month they would put the number of positive office referrals that were earned in the school for that month, and it exploded. Parents were tweeting each other, and they were just so excited because there were more and more each month. And the school was very excited about it because it was the first year that they had tried positive office referrals, and they used that.
I've never heard of positive office referrals. That's not in place of like Mustang tickets or, is it?
Well, I'll just speak for Worcester County. For most of our schools, it's over and beyond getting a ticket. So they did something really outstanding, and they get a positive office referral. Or our high schools are using, and some of our middle schools are using just positive office referrals. So instead of getting a referral to the office for negative behavior, the focus is on positive. And they're just little certificates. And like I said earlier, that one young man at the high school said he put it in his portfolio, which is, great. Anyone else want to talk about how they use their positive office referrals?
It's a wonderful reward for the children, and we do it by grade level in that they're presented at the end of the lunch shift for that entire grade. So I, or one of the administrators, announces and calls up each child and reads what the child is receiving the office referral for. The teacher writes a little blurb what it's about, and then the teacher specialist adds to that, and usually has stickers. And so the child comes up with the whole grade level plotting and takes their office referral and carries it home. It's a really happy time for the kids.
Very, very nice. Could everybody hear that? That it was given out at the end of lunch? Go ahead.
The administration calls home and tells them that, and then we announce it on the TV studio. Our kids announce it inside the children and take them home.
Okay, nice. Anyone else?
We don't use them, but I really like an idea. So just quick questions about them. They're very quick about. So is it something that, would you guys give it to the student, do they know beforehand, or is it just ask them? The administration does it, and the teachers come to you?
Right, the teachers just sent, voted up everything and gave it to the administrators. The kids sometimes don't know.
Okay, so the teacher doesn't give it to them.
You send the students to the office. And it's a lot of times because they'll come down and be like, I got sent to the office, with like a little smirk, and then they'll be like, 4 positive office referrals. And so
Yeah, we do it we used to do it once a month, and now we do it once a week, and they get a certificate, and they can pick between a homework test for one subject, a dress down day, or to do learning for it and announcements and TV. Those are all the started.
Okay, this generated lots of ideas.
For the high school level one, it's kind of hard to do stuff we do bracelets though, and so I give them to teachers. They get like different bracelets a month on them, so our kids get into athletic events free of charge. Which is one, but we keep track of it through a Google form. The teachers have to submit it, and then we can post it out there in social network.
Okay, great, and that's a great motivation, getting it free.
For middle school, we do, if you have in a month's period of time, if you have 6 Mustang tickets, you can cash it in change the monthly reward. Last month was a make your own ice cream Sunday bar at lunch. The month before was fractures room, pick your own donut. And the month before that was pick your own test Monday. Those are really big.
Motivating.
Mm-hmm. And we can keep it under about $100 a month.
Right. Well, we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to touch on this. Just make sure that your PBIS implementation is culturally responsive, that you're getting feedback from parents, kids, staff. And we talked a little bit about one of the elements on the TFI is surveys from parents and students. And I think we're okay with the parents and the students, but then it also talks about community. So we had a lot of conversation about this, and last year when we were doing our TFIs, we were giving credit for surveying community members that came into the school, because you can't really survey community members that have not experienced your PBIS implementation. So your school resource officers, your wellness therapists, your volunteers, or anyone who has come into the school that's not a parent. And then the surveys had gone out to them. So that's kind of how we were looking at it, but if anybody has any ideas on what to do with community surveys, let us know.
That's a great idea.
Well, anyone have any questions before we? Okay, if you will just take about 2 minutes to fill out your evaluation so that that's done, and then